so much, everyone, for starting with the introductions and helping us to build community as we gather again today for a great edition of Leader to Leader. And our focus today is on transgender student rights, but I think, that's more from a legal perspective. And I really think that as building administrators, what we're focused on is how do we make all students feel comfortable and build the kind of climate and culture of acceptance that will allow all students to perform, to their best, both from a social, emotional perspective and also from an academic perspective. So we're going to come at this issue from two different perspectives, thinking in terms of from the Michigan Department of Education, what can we do to support transgender students? What pieces has the department put up that would be beneficial as administrators try to create plans? And we're also going to talk to our friends from Thrun Law, who are going to help us to also think about how do we navigate ensuring that we have transgender student rights also in the forefront of our minds. So we have a great panel with us today, excited to be able to get them underway. All of you, or many of you, I'm sure, have attended these webinars in the past. I'm Wendy Zadeb, MASSP's Executive Director. If it looks like I might be speaking a little bit differently today, yes, I did just have dental work done like 30 minutes ago. So it's not, I'm not normally frozen mouth, but talking out of the side of my mouth, but just, we're just going to go on. We have a Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and that is where we really want you to put your questions and answers. And then we also have the chat. And obviously, if you scroll at the bottom, you see the differences there. The chat is just if you want to just make a comment that other people would see or do introductions. But if you truly have a question that you want our panelists to address, make sure that you put it into the Q&A. At the conclusion of this, it usually takes us a day or so, but we will be sending you all a PDF of the slide decks as well as a link to the recording of this presentation. So if there's someone that should have watched it or needs to see it, it will be there. And also, as always, cataloged on our website for future reference as well. We always do kind of give you a little bit of a disclaimer in terms of, just a reminder that this webinar is posted for public viewing. So just be mindful of any questions that you might pose and just be mindful that this isn't something that's just a members only, for your eyes only type of thing. So we have some great panelists with us today, and I really appreciate everybody putting this together and working together so closely. We have Kim Phillips-Knope, who is a consultant for MDE on some special projects. And we also have Laurie Bechhofer from MDE. And then we have two attorneys from Thrun Law, Jennnifer Starlin and Christina Patzelt. And we're really excited to have all of them with us today. Great panel of experts who are going to share. And as they are sharing their presentations, they know that you're going to be posting in the Q&A. I might grab some of those questions to ask them live, but they will also, in the interest of time, be answering questions in writing in the Q&A as well. So we are going to go ahead and get started and kick off with our friends from MDE. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us. All right, let me share my screen here. All right. So thank you so much for having us. We are thrilled to be here. My name is Kim Phillips-Knope. I use she, her pronouns. I am the project lead for the Michigan Department of Education's LGBTQ+ Students Project. And I've been doing this work with the department as a consultant for almost 17 years now. And my background is in education. I'm trained as a K-12 educator and or secondary ed, actually. And I'm also trained as a social worker. And I'm joined by my colleague, Laurie. Laurie, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, thank you so much for having us. We're thrilled to be here. My name is Laurie Bechhofer, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm the project director on this LGBTQ students project. And I also, some of you may know my name because I'm the lead person at the Department for HIV and Sex Education and all of those questions in that arena. And I've been at the department for 25 years this month. So thrilled to be here.
All right, thanks, Laurie. All right, we start all of our trainings with just a brief land acknowledgement. So we're just going to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge the Native people who've stewarded the land that we're all on throughout the generations. And we just want to start by giving you a little bit of background about the project itself.
Yeah, so as Kim had talked about, she's been working with the project for 17 years, and our project has been going on since 2001, so 20 years. And it started out small. It started out with some folks who were doing work at Oakland schools and Calhoun Intermediate School District. And then we really broadened and started doing work statewide. We developed a training called A Silent Crisis, Creating Safe and Supportive Schools for LGBTQ Students. And then eventually a kind of advanced 201 training called Planning for Action. And then eventually we got a lot of requests for also developing a training of trainers so that we could build capacity in local, intermediate and local school districts to do this work. A key piece of the project has been the collaboration with stakeholders across the state. So for example, we talk regularly with the lawyers at Thrun, also with Neola, and other law firms across the state, but not just law firms. So we're talking with secondary school principals, with MASA, with MASSP, school nurses, kind of you name the group. We want to connect with them because we need to find out what are the issues that you're facing in schools and how can we best support you so that you can help students to succeed. It's been amazing, those connections, and you'll see with number 4 that those connections really came into play in a wonderful way when we were asked to provide support as the State Board of Ed developed its statement and guidance around supporting LGBTQ students. So we had an amazing statewide group with all of those different constituencies represented. We had the athletics folks involved in that, and that guidance we'll be sharing a little bit more in detail today. We also have technical assistants that are part of our project, and that's a key piece of it to make sure that we can really provide support to answer your specific questions. And then finally, we've developed this resource guide, which, believe it or not, is in its 7th edition now. It's used all over the country. I think like 32 states last I checked, and it's divided up into sections based on who you are. So there's a tab for administrators, there's a tab for counselors and mental health professionals, et cetera. And we'll drop a link into the chat with how you can order that resource guide if you're interested as well. All right. So like many folks who were doing face-to-face trainings, we had to pivot when COVID came along. And so we thought about how can we put this stuff that we're doing in the trainings into smaller nuggets, into 90-minute webinars that folks can access depending on what their interests and their needs are. And so we developed a program with 8 different webinars addressing different aspects of safe and supportive schools for LGBTQ students. We open them up to everybody, but some are geared more towards specific constituencies. So we have some that are focused more on the law or on kind of those big picture strategies. We have ones that are specifically for classroom teachers. We have one that's a new one that we have never done before about making your student information system work for you. And so we're excited about that because we received a lot of requests from the field about how we can support our transgender and gender nonconforming students. So we have had amazing participation in these trainings. If you want to move to the next one. So we have done 14 workshops, and we've had 8 different topics that we've presented on. We've had 935 people attend those from 234 school districts across the state. So amazing representation. And really, we've had secondary school principals, we've had superintendents, and we've had lots and lots of social workers, counselors. I would say that's the biggest constituency, but many teachers. The Teacher of the Year has helped lead the teacher one with Kim, and that's been fantastic. And then we do this individualized technical assistance, and we've tried a new strategy, which is drop-in technical assistance once a month on Thursdays, first Thursday of each month, once in the morning from 8 to 9 and once from 3 to 4, recognizing different availability for different folks. And that's been a wonderful opportunity to go more in depth with any questions you have. And also people have really liked to hear other people's stories and what they're dealing with in their districts. And so the cross collaboration has been fantastic.
So we thought it would be helpful for those who are sort of not familiar, just to give a little bit of background about the population of students that we're talking about here today. So some of the data that we're going to share here comes from the Michigan Youth Risk Behavior Survey. What we know from our YRBS data is that about 13% of Michigan public high school students self-identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. That ends up to be about four students in a classroom of 30, if you have a school size of 1,000, we're looking at about 130 students who would fall into this category. You can see the breakdown of students who identify as LGB versus those who identify as transgender. So almost 2% of our public high school student population self-identifies as transgender. We thought it would be helpful, again, just to provide some context too for the experiences of our transgender students. So, and this data comes from a different survey. It's a national survey done by GLSEN that they do every 2 years. And for the last several years, Michigan has had enough young people participate that they could give us a snapshot of what was happening specifically here in Michigan. And what we find from that data is that about 1 in 4 transgender students were prevented from using from using their own name or pronoun. About 1 in 3 were prevented from using the bathroom that aligned with their gender identity. And nearly 1 in 5 were prevented from wearing clothing considered inappropriate for their gender. So these are some of the practices that they're facing that are relatively common. I'm guessing some questions will come up around these as we move forward. And what we know is that when students experience harmful school practices, that those practices have an impact on their experiences in school and outside of school. So what we find is that compared to their cisgender, or if that's a new term for folks, for students who do not identify as transgender, for those peers, transgender students in Michigan, they're about more than 3 times as likely to have been threatened or injured with a weapon at school. They're about twice as likely to have been bullied either online or at school. I'd like to really draw attention to this one, especially as everybody at some point this year probably did some kind of virtual learning. And so really thinking about how that experience might have happened differently for our transgender students than it may have for our cisgender students. You can imagine if this is your daily sort of experience at school, that maybe that's not a place that you want to spend 8 hours a day. And so we do see that our trans students are about 3.5 times as likely to miss school because they felt unsafe. And obviously, if you're not in school, your grades are going to reflect that. And we see that in the report card data as well. And again, if this is your experience, you can imagine that it sort of makes sense that our transgender students are significantly less likely to feel a sense of school connectedness. We know that school connectedness is a predictor of academic success. So that's a really important piece of the pie or the picture for these students. And they're nearly 3 times more likely to harm themselves through cutting. And I think probably the most devastating statistic that we have is that our trans students are almost 4.5 times as likely to have attempted suicide in the last 12 months. That's a significant number of students. It's much higher than for our general population. And you can really see that the impact is not just in the daily lived experiences of students, but the experiences that they have in school actually impact their lifelong trajectory. And so anything that we can do to be supporting them in that space is going to improve their outcomes throughout their lifespan. As Laurie mentioned, we do have a State Board of Education guidance document. The document is actually split into 2 parts. The first half is more general about supporting LGBTQ students broadly. The second half focuses specifically on transgender and gender nonconforming or gender expansive students. These are the different categories that that guidance document is broken down into. And I'm just going to share a few examples of some of the pieces that are in it, just snips from the actual document itself so that you can kind of see what it looks like. But as Laurie said, we worked extensively with as many different constituencies as could be impacted by the guidance. So from students to parents to classroom teachers, administrators, counselors, even as Laurie said, the Michigan High School Athletic Association, lawyers, Neola, everybody was sort of a part of that process to help inform it and make sure that it was appropriate. Right, so the first thing that we just wanted to sort of point to is this piece on names and pronouns. I think this is a very common question that we get asked about is, you know, what names and pronouns should we be using? What information do we need in order to be able to change names and pronouns? What does the law say? And just for reference, I know that Christina and Jennnifer will talk more about Title IX and all of that. The second half of this guidance document really focuses in on Title IX and what that looks like in practice. The second one we wanted to just kind of draw attention to was this piece about privacy and confidentiality, and just reminding folks, I think sometimes sort of navigating what is private information, what is not, especially when it comes to whether or not students have come out to their families or not. So what is the responsibility of schools in supporting a student, in communicating with family, and this particular section kind of focuses in on that. And helps sort of guide schools' decisions about how they inform others or don't inform others in accordance with the law, and how they work with families as well. And then the last one, of course, bathrooms is, you know, certainly by far the most common question that we get, and the guidance points to that as well and really gives important information about what schools' responsibilities are under Title IX in terms of allowing students access to bathrooms in accordance with gender identity. Oftentimes we hear schools saying like, oh, we've got a single stall restroom that our trans students can use. So, you know, we've addressed this issue, and just wanting to make sure that folks know that that's a great option for students who want that. And you may also have students who are transgender and want to use multi-stall restrooms in accordance with their gender identity, and that while we can provide an option of a single stall restroom, we can't actually force students to use that. And again, I know Jennnifer and Christina will dig into all of this in more detail, but we just wanted to kind of give you a sense of what that document looks like, and some background information about the experiences of our transgender students here in Michigan schools before we move on into the law and the next piece. That's sort of what we have. Well, as you know, we'll share our contact information and all that afterwards. But that's our kind of chunk, and then we'll be here to support throughout the rest of the training and to answer questions.
Thank you both. The information and resources that were posted in the chat, those are fantastic. We'll make sure that we grab those and share those as well when we send out the links to everyone. So we appreciate you sharing those pieces and really appreciate your leadership, because, you know, as you mentioned, people are looking for guidance. People are looking for, you know, making sure that they're doing things the right way and just being mindful. And I think putting those statistics out in front of people is really important, because I'm sure there are people out there that think, oh, you know, not in our school, we haven't had that experience yet. And you probably are, but you just don't know it maybe in an outward facing format. So I think that's just a great level of awareness to raise as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Well, Christina and I will jump in now. I will share my screen here. I'm Jennnifer Starlin from Thrun Law Firm. With me is Christina Patzel, also from Thrun Law Firm. We both handle a lot of questions involving transgender students in schools. It's something that has been very prevalent over the last few years. It seems like more so over the last couple of months. We've really seen an increase in these questions, more than I have probably in the last year and a half before that. So if you're getting more questions right now, you're not alone, because we're getting more calls, which means a lot of these questions are coming in. Now, before we jump into some of the meat, we're going to start with a hypothetical, and I think it ties into one of the questions that I saw come in the Q&A with, what to do when a parent and student are not necessarily on the same page. So Christina's going to start us off with our first hypothetical. And if you have thoughts about how you'd handle this, you can put them in the chat, and we'll kind of talk through this entire question. And if this prompts more questions, please feel free to ask them. We want to make sure that people are getting their questions answered today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to talk, the question that came into the chat was, like Jennnifer mentioned, disagreement between parents and students. You can see we've got that at the end of our hypo, but what we want to walk through is some of the basics at first about student records questions. And we've designed our hypos to address some of the most commonly asked questions that we get about transgender students. And so what I want to highlight is what Kim and Laurie were just talking about, the SBE guidance document from 2016. It is fantastic. We encourage you to use it. We use it a lot, and we'll be talking about it as we walk through our hypos. So our first hypo we've got, Abby is a 7th grade student. Abby emails the principal, notifying the principal a week before coming back to in-person learning that she now prefers to use female pronouns, she, her, instead of male pronouns, and would like the school to use her preferred name, Abby, instead of her birth name, Andrew. Abby doesn't have a legal name change. What records can and should the school change after getting this request from Abby? So we'll go ahead and pop things into the chat if you have some thoughts on this. But I think initially, I hope everybody's first inclination is, okay, well, at the very least, what we can do for Abby is we can make sure that staff and students are using Abby's preferred name and pronouns at school. And that's talking to teachers, making sure that students understand that Abby, everybody, a person they previously called Andrew is now going to go by Abby. We're going to use she, her instead of he, him pronouns. There may be a situation where on the first day that they read through attendance, somebody makes a mistake, but we want to be really harping on this with all of your staff and making sure that they understand that they need to be using the student's preferred name and pronouns. Even though Abby doesn't have a legal name change is not required to change the student's name in your school records. This doesn't mean we're going backwards. Abby's in 7th grade. It doesn't mean we're going back to Abby's 2nd grade report card and we're going to change her name on that and pronouns on that. It means moving forward on all of our school records, on all of the information we've got in our school information system, and on all of the informal stuff that we're putting out, school newsletters, in our yearbook, in our anything what we're posting on our website where Abby's going to be identified. We're using Abby's preferred name and pronouns, not her name assigned at birth and her pronouns associated with her sex assigned at birth. So we're making all of these changes that are things that you can pretty easily do. I'd caution all schools, especially to be careful when you, for example, have multiple people putting information into a discipline log. Make sure that all of your staff who are putting information into the discipline log know that we're using the student's name, preferred name and pronouns, because I'm sure Jennnifer and I can both tell you, we've read discipline logs where it jumps back and forth between names and pronouns. And when we're reading a discipline log, now suddenly we have no idea who we're talking about. Are we talking about a witness, a different person? What are we talking about here? And then with regard to, we get a lot of questions about quote unquote official records, transcripts, diplomas, things like that. Make those changes as much as you can as well, whatever you have control over. We understand that there are some places that you don't have control. So I know in the MSDS system, for example, you have to put in a certain name and the student's name has to line up with their birth certificate. And there may be other places where you aren't able to make that change. But everywhere that you're able to make the change, we recommend that you do so. A legal name change is not required. And the student is the best person to understand their own gender identity and inform the school about their own gender identity. It's not up to you to question whether this is a sincerely held belief or anything like that. And then we've got our second piece. We got a question. What about graduation programs and pictures? A student is asked to be called one name, but their legal name is still only their name located in Power School. So in Power School, if you can make the change, we would recommend making that change. You shouldn't need a legal name change to make the change in Power School, I don't think. And with regard to graduation programs and pictures, again, make the changes as much as you can. If your graduation program involves posting, a kindergarten photo and a senior year photo, then maybe have a discussion with the student and their family about what they want posted there, because we don't want to be outing a student, like Kim mentioned. We don't want to be outing their sex assigned at birth and their name assigned at birth. But if the family is okay with that, they may want that in there. So have a discussion with the family in that situation. The question that we got in the chat is our last question here. What if Abby's parents don't agree with calling her Abby and they insist the school call her Andrew? So what if her parents say, no, we want you to use her pronouns that are associated with her sex assigned at birth and her name as it's assigned at birth? We've gotten this question a few times. There isn't a specific, cite to this case law and here's exactly what you have to do. Instead, what we want you to do is have a discussion with the student and their parents and try to essentially sort of mediate this dispute. What you can do is work with the family and try to ensure that at the very least at school, Abby is being called by her preferred name and pronouns by teachers and students. Your compromise may be, okay, well, we're going to call you this at school, but on documents that are being sent home to your parents, your parents have requested we still use your birth name and the pronouns with your sex assigned at birth. But having a conversation with parents and using that SBE guidance that Kim referenced can be really helpful, because students who aren't supported by their parents at home with regard to their gender identification are going to be more susceptible to self-harm, to suicide, to all of these different pieces, and emphasizing to parents that we want buy-in from everybody. The school, the parents, everybody in this situation can help to try to get people on the same page in that situation. Kim also put a lovely resource in the chat that everyone can look at too. So there isn't a specific answer to definitively when the parents disagree, you can say no or you have to say yes. The other point I want to make is something we discussed when we chatted with MD about this about a month ago, is parents have a right under FERPA to access their students' educational records. They have a right to request amendments to those records if they believe the records are inaccurate or misleading. So if you make a change to the records and the parents want to change back to Andrew, they can make that request. But you also likely in your student records policies, you should, if you don't have this, because it's in the FERPA regulations, you have the right to go through what's called a FERPA hearing, which is basically where a parent says, I think this part of my student's records are inaccurate or misleading. The school reviews it, makes a decision, the parent can appeal that to the board, and then it's eventually the school's decision at the end about whether the actual education record is inaccurate or misleading. So there is somewhat of a process to go through if you have that inherent disagreement and the parents are really pushing forward. Mm-hmm. Jennnifer, is there anything I missed there?
Yeah. Couple other questions that came in. And I have not had these questions, but a couple questions about a student that requests multiple name changes over a period of time, 3 times in a semester, 3 times in a year. I haven't personally had that question, but I would look at what is the root of why they're requesting the name change. Is it because I wanted to be called Jennnifer last week, but now I want to be called JJ because it sounds cooler? If that's the case, then maybe we say, all right, for teachers, we're going to use this name and work out an agreed upon name for the kid. And if you have other nicknames that you want your friends to use because they sound cooler, then you can share that information with your friends. I worry if students are changing their name frequently, that's going to make it really hard on staff to know what to call a kid if their name changes every week. So again, having a frank conversation with the student about, listen, we're here to support you and we want to use your preferred name and pronoun. But if this is changing every week and you wanted to be called Jennnifer this week and Christina next week and Kim the week after that, this is problematic and teachers aren't going to be able to catch up. Any other thoughts on that one, Christina?
No, I think it would probably be similar for both transgender and cisgender students, because I know in 5th grade, I tried to get my entire class to call me Christy because I was really tired of people calling me Christina. It didn't take. None of my friends started doing it. So yeah, I failed miserably. My parents wouldn't request the school to officially change my name because They were like, no, you can have a million different nicknames. Tell people what you want them to call you and see what they say. So I agree with Jennnifer, having the conversation, because we want to make this a process that it can click for everybody in their brains, for both staff and students, and not only for your regular staff, but for your substitute teachers. We want to make sure we're handing out a record to them that has the correct name on it so that they know, oh, okay, here's who I'm looking for when I'm taking attendance.
Yeah. Another couple questions came in about diplomas, transcripts not matching legal names, and how to handle student records. So my understanding is that in your student information systems, there are a few things that right now, there's not a mechanism at the state that allows us to change the name fully. My understanding is that for pupil accounting purposes, we have to have the name of the student that matches a birth certificate. And for testing purposes, state testing, it's going to come with the student's legal name. Anything else, there's not a law that says you can't put this name in the yearbook or the graduation program. And I've actually had schools have students come back and say, you know, I graduated last year and I've come out as transgender. I'm using a new name and gender identity. Can you issue me an updated diploma so that when I apply to college, I won't be outed? I don't have to put that on page 1 of my application. And that's something that schools are able to do. Again, assuming that that request is actually made by the student and that we have some confirmation that the student did attend our school, and we believe that this is a genuine need. So I don't know in terms of college applications if there is something that requires a name that matches their social security number. That may be, but we like to focus on what can our K-12 schools do to assist our students moving on to college. At the college level, I'm honestly not sure what information is required on that application, but we've had plenty of students ask for updated diplomas, and that's something that the district can do to help facilitate that. Christina, other thoughts on that?
No, and I think the thing you want to be thinking about with diplomas and transcripts going to college as well is you don't want to be responsible for outing a student. So if a student writes their essay applying to college as Abby, and you send the college a transcript that's labeled Andrew and uses he, him pronouns, now we've run into a situation where the student's gender identity and their sex assigned at birth and their name assigned at birth, you've just revealed all of that information to the college or to an employer they're trying to get employed by. So you want to keep that in mind as well. As far as how the student handles it, applying to colleges and jobs, that's up to the student to how they want to handle it and how they want to address it with their, potential colleges and potential employers. But you want to be careful about releasing information that you're not permitted to release without their consent or parental consent under FERPA. And then also, like Jennnifer was mentioning, we also want to try to make the changes where we can if there's a genuine need and the student's coming back and saying, can you make these changes for me after graduating?
And then before I jump into some more of the slides, one other question came in about if we have a transgender student who wants to use a restroom consistent with gender identity, there may be others who push back and say that that infringes on their privacy rights. I actually have, unrelated to this presentation, notes scribbled down that on something I was working on this morning. We have at least 4 U.S. Court of Appeals cases from various circuits, basically shooting down that argument. Parents for Privacy versus Barr is a 2020 case, and Doe versus Boyerton Area School District is a 2018 case out of the 9th and 3rd circuits. Those both involve challenges to allowing transgender students to access bathrooms based on some purported privacy rights. The courts threw out both of those cases. And then in Whitaker versus Kenosha Unified School District in 2017 and Dodds versus the U.S. Department of Education, federal courts granted injunctions allowing transgender students to use restrooms consistent with gender identity. So there are court cases out there. that are claiming that that does violate other students' rights, but they're overwhelmingly not successful.
Yep.
So with that, I'm going to jump in, and you can keep putting your questions in. We're going to have some more hypotheticals at the end. I just have a few slides I want to get into on some of the legal background. I love the questions. You guys have great questions, and that's what we're here to do today, is answer those. Title IX, you've probably heard about it, especially this year. Some of you may have been to a training session that Christina or I did, or maybe both of us. It's gotten a lot of attention in terms of sexual harassment in school this year. Title IX says that if we accept federal money, we can't discriminate on the basis of sex. That's from 1972, and yet we're still talking about this many years later. Title IX is one of the vehicles, separate from the sexual harassment piece that you've probably heard a lot about this school year. There's also this umbrella just prohibiting sex discrimination in general under Title IX. From that, back in 2016, we had some guidance from the U.S. Department of Education saying that we're interpreting Title IX to protect transgender students and basically allow them to use facilities consistent with their gender identity. On February 22nd, 2017, the Trump administration did roll back some of those guidance documents for a variety of reasons. I remember this very vividly because I was about 3 hours into a Title IX presentation about transgender students when I saw that this came out. And there's nothing like the feeling of having the law change literally while you are presenting on it to really make you feel good that day. So this was several OCR Dear Colleague letters were rolled back in February of 2017. That same day, though, the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights made it very clear that this doesn't mean it's open season on students, and we will continue to hear claims of discrimination and harassment against LGBT students. They have to still be able to learn and thrive in a safe environment. So that obligation has never gone away. This guidance to the field regarding complaints involving transgender students, this was from back in June of 2017. OCR continued to retain jurisdiction to hear transgender student sex-based discrimination claims, and then assess whether harassment of transgender students created a hostile environment. So even though the guidance had been rolled back that said we have to use preferred names, we have to allow students to use the restroom of their choice, OCR was still evaluating, okay, is this failure resulting in a hostile environment for those students? So it wasn't as explicit as it had been before, but again, it wasn't all bets are off. Now, moving forward to 2020, last June, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a 6-3 decision on Title VII's prohibition on discrimination because of sex. And they specifically held that in the employment context, that because of sex, that sex discrimination umbrella covers discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation. The court said it's impossible to discriminate against a person for being homosexual or transgender without discriminating against that individual on the basis of sex. So while Title VII says thou shalt not discriminate on the basis of sex, that also includes in the employment context sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, following that decision, the Bostock decision, this was in September of 2020, OCR updated a statement on its website and basically said Bostock doesn't necessarily apply to us because it interprets Title VII, but we're relying on Bostock to say that Title IX likely also prohibits discrimination against a person based on their status as homosexual or transgender. So under Title IX, which applies to schools and students, OCR said back in September that this is, we're basically going to apply this reasoning moving forward under Title IX. So I know that there's this has been a little bit of a political hot potato, this issue, but a lot of these protections have remained in place, and this position statement from OCR did happen under the Trump administration. It was not a result of the Biden administration ascending to the presidency. Now, since Biden was inaugurated, there have been a couple of other developments, and we're going to talk about these very briefly. January 20th of this year, he issued an executive order recognizing, among other things, that children should be able to learn without worrying about whether they will be denied access to the restroom, the locker room, or school sports, and asked his agencies to review the Bostock decision and review all policies and administrative guidelines and regulations that are in place and make sure that those are consistent with the findings in Bostock. Fast forward to 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, March 8th of this year, he issued a new executive order. This one was a little bit more targeted about discrimination on the basis of sex and sexual harassment, which includes discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, and asked the Secretary of Education within the next 100 days to review all existing orders, guidance documents, policies, and agency action to ensure consistency with his stated policy. So what does that mean right this second today? Not much, but I expect we'll be getting a lot of new guidance from OCR that will apply to schools. So stay tuned. I think it's going to be a busy summer. Next steps, like I said, the federal agencies are going to be reviewing these. We're probably going to get that new guidance specific to transgender students. Stay tuned. In the meantime, I know that Kim and Laurie did a great job kind of highlighting some of the important takeaways from the State Board of Ed's guidance from back in 2016. That's remained in place the entire time. It is guidance, it's not the law, but it does include a lot of important takeaways, including the fact that the student is the best person to determine their gender identity, and encouraging schools, you need to make a good faith effort to address the students by their chosen name and pronouns, regardless of what their legal name is. If you call other students by nicknames, then there shouldn't be a problem calling a transgender student by his or her preferred name. My brother is John. He has always gone by Jack. I don't think there's a yearbook from his high school years that says John. I don't think anyone even knew that was his name. And I'm sure you have many kids who go by middle names. So, if you're if you're addressing those students by a name other than their legal name, and I suspect that every school is using some nicknames and not using every student's given legal name, which some students are probably very thankful for, then we should also honor those requests with respect to transgender students. Consider those record request changes and remind staff that under FERPA, a student's transgender status, gender identity, birth name, sex assigned at birth are all personally identifiable information, which we can't disclose without parent consent, or if the student is 18, without that student's consent. Again, we talked a little bit about names and pronouns. That is reiterated in the state board's guidance. Diplomas and transcripts, this also comes directly from the state board's guidance that, if a transgender student asks the districts to amend those records after graduation, they come back, and I just had this request a week and a half ago, then we should honor that request. And again, just really reinforcing this privacy and confidentiality piece. You should not have staff members out there saying, oh, this student's transgender. Don't forget about the transgender student. We want to make sure staff are aware and are honoring those requests, but we don't need to out this kid more than is necessary to make sure that staff understand that they need to use a different name or pronoun than perhaps they were previously using. When it comes to handling student requests, names, pronouns, bathroom, locker room access are pretty easy. We follow the student's lead in terms of what they're comfortable with. Now, we can't force a student to use a single user restroom or to use a restroom that matches their gender assigned at birth. But we should talk to them. We also shouldn't just throw them in and say, okay, well, you're a girl now, so go use the girls' restroom. They might not be comfortable with that. They might want to use a single-use restroom. So have that conversation with them about what their individual needs are. I also sometimes talk to schools and it's like, okay, well, what about locker rooms? What are we going to do with this? What about sports? And we start with, do we need to have this discussion right now? Because maybe the student doesn't play sports and isn't in gym class. So don't put the cart before the horse. Let's take it one step at a time. Think about it as sort of a chess game and work with the student as they grow and evolve and are more comfortable with things. And obviously, we always need to address harassment and discrimination and evaluate those sports requests with MHSAA. I know MHSAA has some internal systems where they evaluate whether or not a student will be permitted to participate in MHSAA-sponsored activities. I believe Kim and Laurie shared with us that in the past 5 years, they've really only had 6 or 8 requests, or just it was a very low number. So again, if you get this request, don't assume that we're going to have to address every one of these issues with every single transgender student. It might be that they're not interested in something in particular. They don't play sports. So don't put the cart before the horse with respect to those requests. So let's jump in and talk about another hypothetical, Christina.
Okay, so talking about sports, and there are a few questions we're still going to talk through with related to FERPA. So right before we get into the hypo, I just want to address one of those. If a student is 18 and is going to be recognized in the newspaper or on a school website, do parents have the right under FERPA to have the student's preferred name and pronouns not be used, even if the student wants it to be? Good question, because the student's 18 in that. When the student turns 18, the FERPA rights transfer over to them. Parents still have a right to inspect the records, assuming that this child is being claimed as a dependent on their tax forms, but the student is now driving the bus, as it were, with regard to their FERPA rights. And so if you have a situation where the student is 18 and is going to be recognized in the newspaper, the student is the one making the decisions about their preferred name and pronouns. The parents and the students, we can try to help mediate a discussion between them, because again, we don't want to have all this discord in a house where a transgender student is living, but the student is the one driving the bus and has the FERPA rights in that situation. So our second hypo is Brianna is a high school freshman. 2 years ago, she informed the school she was transgender and used female pronouns and the name Brianna. Now she wants to join the freshman girls basketball team and use the same locker room as the rest of the team. How can or should the school respond? I saw a question in our Q&A coming up, what about locker rooms? And Jennnifer has mentioned it a couple times in her statements. Courts have consistently upheld that transgender students be able to access bathrooms and locker rooms that are consistent with their gender identity. So not with their sex assigned at birth, but with their gender identity. So she wants to use the same locker room as the rest of the team. So like Jennnifer mentioned, you may have a student who approaches and says, I want to try out for the freshman girls basketball team, but I'm maybe not comfortable getting changed. Can you provide me with a single-use restroom? Great, then you can make that change and find a single-use restroom. But if you have a student who's requesting to use the same locker room as the rest of the team, the school should permit her to use the same locker room as the rest of the team. You can certainly consider putting up privacy curtains or different things like that in the locker room for all of your freshman girls basketball team to use, because as someone who was a 14-year-old girl, maybe sometimes you don't want to be around other people. Maybe sometimes you're not comfortable with your body. So those are things that the adaptations that you can take, but you cannot force the transgender student to use a single user restroom, to get changed in the office, to get changed in the boys' locker room, or anything like that. We've got to provide access based on their gender identity, not their sex assigned at birth.
Yeah.
And then with regard to the student playing on the team, like Jennnifer mentioned, and we're going to allow the student to try out, and then we're going to be reaching out to MHSAA with regard to questions about that person's eligibility for sports.
I will also add, in Michigan, there's a state law that says any female student can try out for a spot on the male team, even if there's a comparable female team. So if it is a female to male transgender student, that right is guaranteed by law. And I will also add, because I know that these questions come up sometimes, and sometimes parents ask these questions about people exposing themselves in locker rooms or being inappropriate. If anybody's doing that, regardless of gender identity, that needs to be addressed, because that's a misconduct issue. You shouldn't have students streaking through the locker room or, forcing their naked bodies on each other. These are conduct issues. And if they're happening in the bathroom or the locker room by any student, then that needs to be addressed. So that's something that I know it comes up, and our response to parents should be, anytime there's allegations of misconduct, inappropriate behavior, sexual harassment in a locker room or a bathroom, we take it very seriously, and we're going to address it.
Absolutely.
All right. And then, anything else before we go to the next hypothetical, Christina?
Let me see. So we've got we've got a question about someone who is gender fluid, but I think we'll jump back to that one. Someone just posted, hypothetical number 2 is great. What about the opposite? A transgender student in the locker room and another teammate is now uncomfortable. So that's very similar to the question that Jennnifer was talking about when we were talking about the privacy issues in bathrooms. There have been a plethora of court cases where people have made that argument. And there is a court case, I believe in Michigan, Jennnifer, you can correct me if I'm wrong, at the adult level, where I think someone sued Planet Fitness. A woman sued Planet Fitness because she, on a privacy issue with regard to a transgender person using the locker room with her, and lost that case. Mm-hmm. So generally, courts have upheld the right, whether it's under Title VII, Title IX, or the Equal Protection Act, that transgender people are able to use the facilities, locker rooms, restrooms, that align with their gender identity. If we have a student who is uncomfortable with that, then let's have a conversation with that student. Does that student want to use a single user restroom to get changed then? In the nurse's office, in the main office, something like that. Would it help that student if we put up some privacy screens? What accommodations can we make to make that student feel more comfortable? But as far as from a legal perspective, most court cases that I can think of off the top of my head that have dealt with bathroom or locker room access and the argument of privacy on behalf of someone else have come down on the side of the transgender person or transgender student.
Yep. All right. So hypothetical number 3, Christina.
Okay. So Cody is an 8th grader who informed the school at the beginning of the school year that he uses male pronouns instead of female pronouns and goes by the name Cody instead of his birth name Carly. School made those changes and gave Cody access to a single user restroom in the main office. Cody is now requested to use the boys' bathroom in the 8th grade hallway. How should the school respond? So this is a 2-parter because we've got a second part of this. We've talked a lot about this issue with regard to bathrooms, and we just did talk a lot about it. The student could start off using a single user restroom and feel comfortable there. And if the student decides that later they would like to use the restroom that corresponds with their gender identity, then that's like Jennnifer said, we don't put the cart before the horse. We'll address each issue as it comes. But if the student makes that request, that's a request that we need to be granting, because legally there is some exposure for the school if you don't grant those requests. What if Cody later reports other students are making fun of him while he is using the boys' restroom? What do we do then? Okay, I hope everybody immediately was like, bullying, harassment, we're going to investigate it, we're going to issue discipline. Great, great, great. Because like Jennnifer said, any type of misconduct, regardless of the race, disability, age, gender identity, or sex of the students involved. We're addressing the misconduct so that we can create a safe environment for all students. And so if this situation resulted in, like the question we had previously, another student is feeling uncomfortable, if someone says, well, Cody came up to me in the bathroom and, you know, is flashing people or doing something weird, then we would address that as a code of conduct violation. Nobody gets carte blanche to do whatever they want when they're in the bathroom or locker room. That's just, we have rules in place. But if Cody reports that other students are making fun of him while using that restroom, you want to make sure that you're not just thinking about this as, oh, okay, well, if two boys were in the restroom and one was calling the other stupid, you know, I'd probably intervene and say, stop calling each other stupid, and we might be able to handle it. If other students are harassing, bullying, making fun of Cody on the basis of his gender identity, then you want to make sure that you're looking at your anti-harassment policy or your non-discrimination policy, and make sure that you're following your necessary investigation procedures there, and that we're offering some supportive measures to Cody to make sure that Cody feels comfortable at school and that we're addressing this potential harassment issue. Because we don't want to necessarily treat it as exactly the same thing. It is misconduct, but we've got to make sure that we're addressing the harassment piece of it as well. Anything I missed there, Jennnifer?
No, I think that's great. And then I think the only other question we had was on the gender fluid student.
Mm-hmm.
You want to take that one?
Yeah. So, okay, we got a question. The student calls themselves gender fluid, changes male and female identities within the hour, wants to be able to use whatever locker room they want, given what gender they are on a given day. Okay. So I think similar to what Jennnifer was talking about, where the student is changing their name repeatedly over the course of many weeks. In that situation, what we need to be talking to the student about is we have to consider how to make this work logistically at the school. How can we ensure that you are safe, that we are safe, and that we are helping you? Because we don't want the student to have to come into the office every single day and tell you, this is the bathroom I want to use today. This is the bathroom I want to use today. Let's involve the student's parents. Let's have a conversation. Let's consider involving the school counselor even. Let's have a conversation about what is going to be the most comfortable for this student at school and how we can work through this process so that it best serves them, and so that the school logistically can make sure that we're helping, so that, you know, just because somebody wasn't there, you know, was out for spring break for a week, comes back and, you know, uses the wrong name or says they're not using the right bathroom. We want to make sure everyone has the right information. And sometimes a lot of those changes could be difficult. So we want to try to come up with a reasonable solution for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree completely. I think that's a tough issue to deal with. Yep. So sitting down and trying to come up with a plan that works for the student and works for the school. I mean, the bathrooms are one thing, but I see a whole host of issues if, you know, third hour the student says I'm male, and then by fourth hour changes and the teachers are misgendering them in pronouns because they don't know. I mean, that's going to be very difficult. And we want to make sure the student's comfortable. So I think there's probably a way we can sit down and come up with a plan that works. And that plan might need to be updated periodically, but not every hour on the hour. So I think it's a good idea to sit down and say, okay, what are your needs and what can we do to address this? And what facilities do we have that you would be comfortable in, where we can address this issue less frequently than every hour on the hour. Yes.
Wow, I cannot believe you ladies got through all of this information in that amount of time. And I really appreciate the hypotheticals, because these are real life things that, you know, building principals face on a regular basis. And, you know, as you were going through these things, a couple of things came to mind. One is the turnover in building administration is huge. I mean, the number of new assistant principals coming on a regular basis. And, you know, I think to varying degrees, ed leadership prep programs, you know, do or don't prepare people for this. And No, the other thing is as you referenced, even if during your your ed leadership prep program, your school law class, the law was here at that point, and now you're an administrator and things have changed. So it's just so important that building administrators really get regular legal updates, are aware of things that are going on and changes that might occur. But I think most importantly, when a lot of these changes have come out, whether we're talking about gender or religious preferences, whatever it might be, one of the things that's always interesting to me, like if I'm listening to a national talk show or something and people act like these issues are so monumentous. And as a principal, I'm thinking to myself, we just accommodate kids. We just do. I mean, I think about requests I would get from kids on a regular basis, and it was like, not hurting anyone. Here's how I can help you accomplish whatever it is. I mean, and that's a gamut of things. So I think hopefully that we are, building an inclusive environment, trying to find ways just to make school a welcoming environment that accommodates all students. And I think you can never go wrong with that mentality as you're approaching these issues. But really important for people to just be aware. And the other thing that came to mind is, as all of you were talking, is that we probably need to have some parent universities, because so much of the blowback that administrators get is because parents just are not aware of, legal issues that the school might be facing, changes that have happened. And unfortunately, it's also just a general lack of acceptance that maybe some people might have, and thinking that, the school is just being politically correct or whatever it might be. So I think it's important that we also just maybe be proactive about some of these issues by having parent university type sessions, by being able to say, we're going to meet with parents 4 times a year. And to me, this is one of the silver linings of the pandemic, if there is such a thing, is that parents are way more engaged with PTA meetings, and different other opportunities, because they have a chance to join in from Zoom from home. So this might be an opportunity for us, and this would definitely be one of those topics where you could have a parent university session, you share information, and I think it could really help you get in front of a lot of the questions parents might have. Anything else any of you might want to share before we close out today? I saw that you were doing a great job of answering questions. We are going to capture all of that Q&A, so that way if something wasn't shared out loud, people will still be able to get access to those answers, because I think there were great questions asked today.
Yeah.
I'll just say, I know we at Thrun wrote an article that summarizes a lot of the legal stuff that Jennnifer has on the slides that I know MASSP is going to be posting. So you can look out for that too if you're looking for, a deeper dive into legal guidance.
Yes, thank you for doing that as well.
And we will, I put it in the chat, and we'll make sure in the follow-up email that you get the link to upcoming trainings and also our technical assistance calendar, so that you can take advantage of that as well.
All right. And I just wanted to say, on behalf of Thrun Law Firm, thank you to all of you for what you do. I know that this has been the most challenging year ever, and you all do not hear thank you enough. Everybody likes to take shots at schools, but we see what you're doing. We see how much work you've been putting in, and we just can't thank you enough for what you've done for kids this year.
Yes,
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time. And thank you to everyone that joined us for the webinar today. We will be sending you a follow-up email with a link to the recording of this presentation, and we captured all of those resources that were shared in the chat, and we will also document the Q&A, so you will be receiving all of those items, and also a PDF of any slides that were shared. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.